Welcome everyone. Today we find another big professor, Dr. Fred Phillips. He is actually one of the big scholars and he has a lot of contributions in Asia Pacific, in USA, and he is an expert on technologies and he do work around the world. He has a lot of publications and he work in an editorial panel. So today, actually, as a researcher, I find that I have to learn a lot of things from him. So hopefully, our audience from Asia Pacific, they will learn a lot of things from these interview sessions. Hello, Dr. Fred. How are you?
I'm very well, Mr. Sharif, and how are you?
Yes, we are fine. We are fine. And can you, because you have very interesting bio, can you introduce yourself with our audience? Like, we want to know more about your work and about your present contributions. We want to know.
Well, thank you. Yes. Um, my career has consisted of a number of lucky events, and I had the luck to be in the right place at the right time on many occasions. I think a career success factor that I would recommend to any of you is to recognize when you are in the right place at the right time so that you may take advantage of it. One of these circumstances was working as a high school student for a professor who turned out to be a much more famous and accomplished professor than I had ever suspected. And when he moved from the town we were living to Austin in Texas, he contacted me and suggested that I go to university in Texas. And I did. And this was a wonderful change and a wonderful adventure. And through this gentleman, I had my first occasion to visit Asia. I spent a number of months in Japan as a graduate student, uh, studying economics, even though my major was management science, but I was in the system science department at Tokyo Kogyo Daigaku, which they now call Taitech. Uh, I went to work in industry in the market research for a market research company for about a dozen years after the PhD. And it was a great learning experience. And when I got tired of it, I went to see a gentleman who had been on my doctoral committee. He was a techno entrepreneur who had made the better part of $1 billion US in his startup. And he was at that time in the late 1980s mentoring a young Michael Dell as Michael started his computer company. So this gentleman who I went to see had been dean of the business school at University of Texas. And after he stepped down as dean, he started a research institute, sometimes called a think tank. It was called the IC Square Institute. Um, People would ask him, what does IC Square stand for? He would say, the Institute for Constructive Capitalism. Well, people on the right-hand side of the political spectrum didn't like that name because it had an implication that there was some other kind of capitalism, which of course there is. People on the left ridiculed the name because they thought capitalism could not be constructive. I'm sorry I'm digressing, but ultimately he changed the name IC Square to suggest innovation, creativity, and capital. All right, so he hired me. I became the research director of this institute. And he had what you might call a personal brain trust. He recruited professors and some people who were not academics from all around the world, not just from the University of Texas at Austin. And these were people who were interested in interdisciplinary research in the ultimate commercialization or valorization of their research.
Mhm.
In other words, they were not researching in isolated silos, and they wanted to their work to have some impact in the real world. Uh, Excuse me for saying real world, because the academic world is very real too, but this is sometimes how people refer to the non-academic sphere as the real world. I find it funny. Well, after the founder of this institute and my mentor um, retired and ultimately passed away, his successors as directors of the institute had very little idea of what to do with all these distinguished fellows. And because the subsequent directors had less clout in the less influence in the enormous bureaucracy of the University of Texas, uh, subsequent presidents of the university also wondered why the institute was bringing these uh, fellows, as we call them, at great expense every couple of years to put their heads together. Well, um, the fellows enjoyed interacting with each other because in their academic departments, most of the researchers did enjoy doing pure research and working in silos that are isolated from the other disciplines at the university. So our fellows really enjoyed getting together. And let's see where to pick up the thread of the story. As
Mhm.
research director of the Institute, which I was until 1995, um, I was supposed to manage this fellows program, but one cannot manage people who've won the Nobel Prize and other
Mhm.
similar honors. All I could do was gently try to coordinate them, and but they found great inspiration for working with each other. But as I say, the subsequent presidents of the university did not really sympathize with this program because it involved people outside who are not affiliated with UT Austin. We call it UT for the University of Texas. And they just didn't know what it was for. So last year, the university and the institute very abruptly discontinued the fellows program. And it was funny in a way because I hadn't um, managed this program since 1995, but the older fellows remembered it and they called me and said, Fred, what shall we do? We enjoy interacting with each other, and we would like to continue to do so, but how?
It's
So
funny
what
because I had
what we did was spin off the fellows program into an independent nonprofit corporation. You would probably call it an NGO.
Mhm.
And we have really just completed in the last week or so the process of incorporating this new NGO and dealing with all the U.S. government tax matters and banking and so forth. We
Mhm.
just got our first project as an independent NGO. I'll tell you about that in a moment. I think another lucky break that I had in my life was to meet the founding editor of a journal called Technological Forecasting and Social Change. Um, I had seen the journal, enjoyed reading it. That may be hard to believe because most journals are not enjoyable to read, but this one very readable because it is intended to be read by policymakers as well as by academics. I published my first paper in that journal in 1996, and just became better acquainted with the founding editor. And ultimately, he said, "Fred, when I retire, I think you'll take over the journal." And I was astonished to hear that, but I said, "Yes, sir. I'll do my best." And then since 2010 or so, I've been editor in chief of this journal, and it is a hugely prestigious and popular journal, especially in Europe and in East Asia. I should say it's more popular in those places than in the United States. It's got a very high impact factor, which, as you know, is the ratio of citations to its papers to the numbers of papers that are published. And this is a very frequently used measure of a journal's reach and prestige. So these are things that I'm doing in addition to my day job as a professor at the University of New Mexico. Um, I told you about my first trip to Asia in the 1970s. I returned on a number of occasions to Japan, and also had short teaching assignments through Stony Brook University, State University of New York, in Korea and in Taiwan in the first few years of this century. Ultimately, the university at Stony Brook said, "Fred, we're going to open a campus in Korea. Would you do that for us?" So in late 2011, my wife and I moved to Korea. Children are grown; they have their own careers now, so we were comfortable to leave the United States. And I spent 3 years in Incheon in Korea at the new multi-campus that the Korean government had built to attract foreign universities to Korea. So I was affiliated with the engineering college of SUNY Stony Brook, and we got a number of departments launched in Korea. And then I had the opportunity to move to Taiwan and be a distinguished professor at Yunzi University in Taiwan. And I've always felt at home in Taiwan, and I took that opportunity. And we built the International College at Yunzi. And this was on a contract basis. And unlike the United States, and unfortunately, in Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and perhaps in your country,
Yes.
after age 65, no more professor contracts. So I moved back to the United States to Albuquerque, New Mexico, about 2 years ago. And later on, I'll tell you more about New Mexico. So that's basically my story, and I think you'll then want to hear more about
Yes.
Tando and so on.
Yes. Sir, you have a very good contribution in policy making. Especially, you have a lot of experience to involve with technologies and this kind of policy making, sir. So even though the country like Malaysia, even different developing nations from Asia, like Asia Pacific market, you have a lot of experience there. So how actually a techno policy and this kind of things actually governments and this kind of institutions they can adapt, or we can make a bridging in between North America and this Asia Pacific markets. And you have a major experience even in China and US relationship. So
Yes, yes. In fact, I was supposed to spend this spring semester in Shanghai, but the COVID-19 affected that plan negatively. I did spend a semester in China last year at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Uh, you are using the word technopolicy, and I think you might have misheard a word that Sheridan Tatsuno and I used. Uh, Technopolicy is a good word and obviously relates to policy. But when we speak of Technopolis, we are putting together two words that have origins in the Greek language. Techno, of course, it's obvious to you what that means, but polis is the Greek word for city. All right. So when we talk about Technopolis, we're talking about uh, science cities, research parks. The Technopolis, in the small sense, can mean simply a research park or a science and technology park that's usually connected with a university and dedicated to uh, commercializing university innovations. Technopolis, in the big sense, means a regional economy, usually a metropolitan area that the economy of which is heavily based on uh, technology companies and knowledge-based companies, like Silicon Valley, like Austin is now, okay, um, oh my, like Daeduk in South Korea. Okay, um, so how have we reached out to policy? Well, in the old days of the IC Square Institute, we had some fellows that we called Washington Fellows. And these were people who knew the policy, who lived in Washington, D.C., and knew the policy picture and procedures and how to uh, influence and persuade a senator, this kind of thing. Okay. And this was part of the story of how we ultimately got the Tando name. The other activist aspect of that institute was that it launched one of the first new business incubators in the Western United States called the Austin Technology Incubator, which is still thriving today. And up until very recently, it was still part of the IC Square Institute. So because we were not just a think tank, but doing things like new technology business incubation and policy activism in Washington, D.C., we were calling ourselves a think tank until one day when we had a visiting delegation from Japan. And they were curious about what we did, and we showed them everything. And they said, "Oh, you're not just a think tank, you're a think and do tank." And this was a very cute phrase in Japlish, I suppose. And it captured what we do. So when we recently spun off the Fellows Program into Tando Inc., we chose the name Tando to mean think and do.
Oh, brilliant. Yes.
You got it.
Yes.
So that's the origin of that name. Uh, the World Technopolis Association, I think before we began the broadcast, I started to tell you about this Korean organization. It also sent delegates to Austin around the year 2000, and I got acquainted with them, and they invited me to come to Korea every year to speak to the delegates from mostly from developing countries in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, Central Asia, who would come to Korea for training programs in how to start their own technopolis. Okay. Now, it's a very difficult thing to do, especially for a poorer country. And because many of these countries have a considerable difficulty to maintain a steady policy direction. If there's changes in regime, maybe there's one minister of education who wants to move things in the Technopolis direction, but then a new president of the country replaces that minister, and the subsequent minister has no uh, interest in pursuing the project. So there's many reasons why these initiatives fail. Uh, but they keep trying, and I admire it, so I keep trying to help. The World Technopolis Association is supported by two sources. One is the city of Daejeon, which is in the central part of the South Korean peninsula, and the site where the Koreans have tried to build their big technopolis with considerable success, I should say. And then the second supporter of World Technopolis Association is UNESCO.
Mhm.
All right, so countries send their delegates to the WTA workshops each year. And if a country wants more personalized attention from WTA experts, they can petition UNESCO for funds to have, excuse me, petition UNESCO for funds to send an expert panel to their country. I beg your pardon.
Sorry.
Um, so through that mechanism, I have traveled with WTA people to Costa Rica, to Poland, and to Indonesia, and through an indirect connection also to Iran on a couple of occasions. And what UNESCO wanted our panel to do was to redesign the entire national innovation system of Indonesia. And we have produced a report that UNESCO has published. I should say there have been many reports on Indonesia that UNESCO has published, and few of them have really made a difference. But and I asked our UNESCO representative, why are we trying again, given this history of reports on Indonesia that sit on a shelf? And he said, we must keep trying. Who knows, this time it may be different. And I don't know whether Indonesia really intends to follow our recommendations, but I do believe that the Indonesian society and economy are very dynamic and are going to grow and take on a higher profile among the economies of the world. I have a lot of confidence in Indonesia's future. Among other setbacks, they suffer this regime change problem I said before, and of course, now, as you know, they need to move their entire capital because of rising sea levels and flooding and so on. A very difficult and expensive thing. There is another association called the International Association of Science Parks, something like that. There's
Mhm.
also an Asian Society for Science Parks.
Mhm.
And through their invitation, I spoke in Iran, in Shiraz, at a conference on Technopolis. And we had a workshop after the conference where I coached an Iranian team through their Technopolis planning process. And one of the first hurdles in such a workshop is to get the team to understand that they're not going to duplicate Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
Silicon Valley not only enjoyed a unique confluence of historical influences, but it was
Mhm.
one of the first. And
Mhm.
being one of the first, you get positive returns to scale, you get lock in, and it's very difficult to imitate. Um, Places like Austin and Seattle and Boston have been trying. to imitate Silicon Valley, but and with some success, but they're still not Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has a very unique dynamic, and there's not going to be one in Iran. So, how can you, after you realize that you're not going to build a Silicon Valley, at least not in the near future, how can you pick a realistic goal? So we had a form to fill out about the state of university centers of excellence, the state of access to financing for startups, the state of government commitment, and so on. And then part of the form was to say, what is a realistic role model? Look at the other countries around the world and pick one or pick a metropolitan area elsewhere in the world that you have a reasonable chance of emulating in the next 3 to 5 years. All right, so the Iranian team put their heads together and said, Dr. Phillips, we have decided on our role model. Great, I said, what is it? They said, Malaysia.
Okay. Very interesting. Yes.
Isn't it? Yes. Uh-huh.
Yes, yes.
Because they see some cultural and religious similarity, and they admire the progress that Malaysia has made, and they would like to be more like Malaysia. So there you go. And
Yes.
your question about policy influence in Asia.
So before you go to policy, sir, before you go to policy, basically, this is another professor. Even he is my personal professor. He's Musharraf Hossain. He was president of Asia Pacific Human Resource Management. Presently, he also run as a president of Human Resource Management Organization. So he want to send you his regards. On the other hand, Araf Mehraz, he said, this is nice discussion with the excellent person, Professor Dr. Fred Philip, who was on contractive medal. Like he also recognized. I think people also starting to Google your profile and these things. Yes. Yes, please proceed, sir.
Okay, let me tell you about that. The journal that I edit, Technological Forecasting and Social Change, has been one of the primary outlets for research on the what's called the long cycles or the K waves. These are business cycles that are longer, much longer than the usually what we think of as a business cycle. The Kondratiev waves, named after a Russian economist. He did most of his work around the year 1900 or a little before, but he detected these long waves. And after that, after Kondratiev, other economists like Schumpeter and Kuznets picked up on the idea. They modified the idea, but still the idea persists that there are waves of about 60 years where technological innovation is very active. And then another part of the wave where innovation slows, but industry grows around exploiting those innovations of the upwave. That's called the downwave. All right, well, there have been about 5 of these cycles that are fairly well documented. And but aside from Schumpeter and Kuznets, very few economists put much emphasis on this. And economics journals tend not to publish papers on the Kondratiev waves. All right, we have in our journal. And first I say, why do economists not publish in their journals on the Kondratiev waves. And one of the reasons is that economists have always treated technological advance as somehow external to the economic system. Recently, that's begun to change, and some Nobel Prizes have been awarded to people who have brought technological innovation inside economic theory. But because innovation was considered by everybody except Schumpeter to be not the domain of economic thinking, and technology is so central to the idea of the Kondratiev waves, there have been very few outlets for people who think about that. And because I don't pretend that getting this medal is in any way related to my personal brilliance,
Yes, yes.
such as it may be, but because I've been editor of this journal for so long, and we have, by virtue of welcoming papers on the K-waves, helped to advance research in that area. The Russian Academy of Sciences called me in 2017 and said, we'd like to give you this medal. So this was great fun. I flew to Moscow, put on a tuxedo, delivered a laureate lecture to the Russian Academy and the Kondratiev Society, which is attached to the Russian Academy of Sciences, and had a banquet and flew back to Taiwan, where I was living at that time.
Yes.
In my early days at the IC Square Institute, in the fellows directories, because of the accident of the alphabet, my profile, Phillips, was next to the profile of Ilya Prigogine, who I'm sure you've heard of. He was got the Nobel Prize in chemistry and was hugely prominent researcher in complex systems and so on. And he spent half the year at the University of Texas and half the year at Leuven in Belgium. And I always envied that so much. I thought, he was a friend, but I was so much junior to him. I thought, wouldn't that be wonderful to spend half the year in your home country and half the year elsewhere? And geez, not to mention that nice prize that he won. So here we are many years later, and I spend half the year in New Mexico and half the year in China, and the Russians gave me a nice prize. So I do feel good about that.
Yes, sir. Sir, there are many other responses from our audience. Mohammad Shohel Rana, he says, sir, we know you have worked in many countries and on many issues. Please, what kind of thinking and working you are doing right now in current COVID-19 situations? On the other hand, Humaira Tanzila, she's from Malaysia. She said, it's a great honor for your opinion. Thank you, sir, for your time today. So actually people are responding, and they actually like your discussions. They want to learn more from you, sir. So you are talking about this techno policy. I think this is very interesting topic.
Okay, now I've just seen the panel on the screen that says live comments. So the professor who sent me his greetings, please return.
Thank you, sir.
To him. And we are preparing with a multinational team from China, Japan, and the United States, a special issue of the journal on the COVID-19 and how society may change subsequent to the pandemic. I also just helped one of our distinguished board members on the journal with an editorial about COVID-19, and so you'll see a lot coming out from the journal right now. I know very little about medicine, but in the fall, when I teach technology forecasting at the University of New Mexico, I do plan to open the course with the discussion of the similarities between the equations that are used in epidemiology and the equations that we use in technology diffusion. Of course, there are many of the same S-shaped curves for technology diffusion and for the spread of a disease. Um, Although, of course, the difference is that in technology diffusion, we usually want to accelerate it to get the product out to a broader range of people more quickly. And in epidemiology, we want to slow down the S curve. In other words, not allow people to get infected. So we use the same equations, but with opposite intent. And I'll try to elicit that realization from the master's degree students when I teach the course. Um, a lot of my current research activity has been about the Sustainable Development Goals. Uh, the approach that I take to answer the commenter's question is the approach that I learned from my PhD advisor and from the founder of the IC Square Institute, to be interdisciplinary, to take what's called the systems approach. Okay? And let's see. So we have to understand that the various challenges that we're facing interact. Okay, we have climate change, we have the pandemic, we have the current civil unrest in the United States and in Hong Kong and in Brazil and elsewhere. Uh, we have strange signals arriving from a distant part of the galaxy that's making people nervous too. And so we have to think how we can handle multiple disasters simultaneously, how they interact, what's the psychological and sociological effects that we need to deal with. Let me give you an example of the kind of system thinking that I'm going to hold something up to the camera, and I hope that you can see it.
Yes, the climate contempt for science, income inequality, climate change. Yes, crony. Yes,
The idea,
naturalistics. Yes, very good model. Very good model. I think even already one of the audience already come. I would like to know what Mr. Fred sir learned while working in different countries and culture. Thank you, Mr. Ankit from India. Actually, Dr. Fred share his models, what his workings in the climate change, and how it relate to us. Brilliant, doctor.
okay, I will answer the comment after I explain the diagram.
Yes, sir.
Here we
Yes,
have
sir.
a feedback loop.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
it is it is really a vicious cycle. Uh,
Yes, sir.
when there are uh, ill effects of climate change,
Mhm.
this is an opportunity for authoritarian opportunists to take power in a country and say that we can fix this by blaming other people, by blaming other countries, by blaming ethnic minorities, and all the blaming tactics that authoritarians use. All right, once there's an authoritarian regime in place, as we're seeing in many countries at the present moment, uh, there is cronyism that enriches the authoritarian's friends at the expense of other people. And the authoritarians tend to show a contempt for science. They reduce the funding for science in their country. And as a result, there's less scientific talent available to attack the challenges like climate change, and the climate change gets worse. And then the cycle continues again. The authoritarians consolidate their uh, influence because the climate problem has gotten worse, and they deflect their inability to fix it by taking still more drastic and sometimes violent measures against the people that they're blaming, and the cycle continues in a downward spiral. So this is one way of looking at our current challenges from a system view. Um, and the system view as regards the sustainable development goals, the approach that I've taken is to concentrate on the interactions among the SDGs. It's fairly well established that if you advance one of the SDG goals, in many cases you will retard or stall or set back another one of the SDG goals. Some countries have adopted a mission of attacking just one of the SDGs, or they're doing something called their carbon reduction target without regard to these interactions. Okay, so I'm pushing a research project that's got support from China, the United States, and Europe to catalog these interactions. Luckily, many of the interactions are a positive nature, that if you advance one target, you're also advancing others. But the number of negative interactions among the SDG targets is considerable, and that makes it silly from a policy perspective to single-mindedly pursue one of the goals or one of the targets without regard to the effect that has, the negative impact that has on another one of the targets. So the policy, the technology policy implication of this is that we can identify technological areas where an innovation would reduce the negative magnitude of an interaction between a pair of SDGs and encourage progress through prizes or subsidies, encourage projects that lead to technological advances in those areas. So that's what we're trying to do there. Okay, what Fred Sir learned while working in different countries and cultures? Well, you know, right now we have a lot of problem in the United States focused on what's called race. And people tend, as you know, to be often somewhat afraid, or if not just simply standoffish, about people who don't look like themselves. This has been, there are even people in the United States who argue about whether this is a serious problem or not. I'm convinced that it's a very serious problem, what's called systemic structural racism in the United States. Okay. People are upset, rightfully so, about the brutality of certain police forces in the United States and the brutality of certain individual police officers that is actually encouraged or not discouraged by the policeman's colleagues. And police brutality is one problem, and structural racism is another problem, but they obviously interact because some police are brutal because they have racist bullying personalities. Uh, so we have another system problem, right? Uh,
Mhm.
there's people who do not understand feedback loops like the kind that I just showed you. And if
Mhm.
people distrust the police and the police become violent, that increases the level of distrust that the
Mhm.
public has in the police. But the police don't seem to realize that. There are a discouraging number of people in the world who are linear thinkers and who cannot grasp the idea of feedback loops. So this is another problem. But I tell you this because what I've learned while working in different countries and cultures is just an ease, a feeling of relaxation with working with people of all kinds, and an appreciation that the more diverse backgrounds are brought to a problem, uh, the more likelihood you have of coming up with a creative way to ameliorate the problem, if
Mhm.
not solve the problem. Okay. So people who come from different cultures bring different predispositions to the way that they attack the problem, and this is hugely valuable. Not to mention that their cultures are so fascinating in themselves. All right, so something I've observed that just
Mhm.
still, I don't know what the word is, tickles me is that I've seen, people of complexion similar to mine in the United States who have a really bad attitude about people with different color skin. And then
Mhm.
these people will go to somewhere like Japan, and
Mhm.
which society in Japan can be racist too, right? And a Japanese person, and I'm only using Japan as an example. I love Japan, but anyway, some person in Japan might make a disparaging remark about Americans who have dark skin. And even
Mhm.
this racist American will defend them, okay? Because they take the attitude that, you know, there are neighbors in America. How dare you, Mr. Japanese person,
Mhm.
criticize our neighbors, even though that person is very critical of his neighbors when he's at home. So this whole dynamic of ethnicity and so forth is something you really learn a lot about when you work in different countries and cultures.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, sir, this is very interesting. And in present situations, one of the interesting, like economic policy or diplomatic relationship, whatever it is, how you think, uh, we want to know more about this USA and China relationship.
Yes, yes.
What's the situation actually? What's the deeper understanding? How do you think? You are the think tank. What will be the scenario of this relationship?
Um, well, we don't. There's by no means a unified attitude about this in the United States. Um, Business people want to have continue open trade with China. Um, there's factions in the United States who are primarily focused on national security, and they would like to have a total separation between Chinese technology products and American technology products. And then
Mhm.
you have individual people who are afraid that that if they buy a Chinese telephone, that there'll be constant surveillance. Although I think we should not pretend that the American government doesn't do similar things. Uh, all right, well, that would be a zero-sum game if we totally separate American technology from Chinese technology, and it's not even possible
Mhm.
because so many components are sourced from each other's countries, and the disruption in global supply chains and the impact on the global economy would be so great if we attempted such a separation. And in any case, well, the national security people are thinking in terms of some what they call uh, global technological superiority. But that phrase has really no meaning, because the fact is China is better than the United States in artificial intelligence and in quantum theory, um, quantum technology, and the United States is still superior in semiconductor design, semiconductor manufacture. So we're never going to see that one country is, we're never again going to see that one leading country is overall technologically superior to another. We have to be more detailed. We have to accept that one country is superior in a certain technological area, another country is superior in other technological areas. In other words, we have to become comfortable with heterogeneity. Um, and in fact, well, if you, as soon as you admit heterogeneity, you have a lot of data to keep track of. Who's superior to whom in which particular aspect? But we have information technology, right? We have the necessary ICT to keep track of all these things. And we can then lead to what we call, excuse me, adaptive policy, where the policy doesn't have to be the same for everybody, doesn't have to be like walking into a store and finding that they only sell clothing in one size and that they expect everybody to wear the same size clothing. But with adaptive policy, we can say that the policy differs in this case or that case because of time, because of place, because of local conditions. And we've actually seen this in the COVID situation when Governor Cuomo of New York, the governor had difficult decisions about the timing of lifting the lockdowns. The lockdown orders mean that people must stay at home to avoid becoming infected or to avoid infecting other people. And he lifted the lockdown in rural areas of New York State while maintaining it in the densely populated New York City, because obviously the danger was higher where people were living closer together. So this is an example of adaptive policy. And actually, it's the approach that we're taking with the SDG research also, because one one strategy to reduce SDG negative interactions in Nepal might work very well in Nepal, but not work in Namibia, but might actually be exportable to Malaysia. And so we look for local solutions that would be dangerous and should be prohibited elsewhere, but in some other places, but might be highly advantageous to adopt in still another location. And you asked me before the broadcast began about to describe where I live. And in this context, it makes sense to segue into that topic. When I lived in Taiwan for 4 years, the climate, I guess, is must be similar to some parts of Malaysia. I haven't
Yes.
spent sufficient time in Malaysia to know, but it's low to sea level, very humid, and so on. And now I live in the desert in the state of New Mexico. And I should say that, because it even confuses some Americans, that New Mexico is a state of the United States. It is not in Mexico. it is in the United States.
Yes.
In the Southwest United States between Texas and Arizona. And it has some of the most spectacular scenery in the United States. It's dry, it's high elevation, and very beautiful in a way that's different from the beauty that we see in Taiwan and Malaysia. It's got itself a great number of cultures. Uh, and it's one of the few places in the United States where people truly enjoy the multiplicity of cultures. We have the culture of the Northern European immigrants in New Mexico, the culture of uh, the Mexican immigrants who were ultimately Spanish and American Indians. And then, of course, we have the many tribes of indigenous people here in New Mexico. Um, let's see, the Pueblo tribes, the Hopi, the Zuni, the Navajo, and you've heard these names. So, and the mix of cultures is hugely enjoyable. The art that the indigenous people here produce is absolutely spectacular, and my wife and I have always enjoyed collecting it, even back in the 1980s when we lived in Texas and used to vacation out here. I have to say that their music is rather boring, but their visual art is just absolutely world class. And it's the state of New Mexico is really very much worth a visit. But the climate is so different from what we're used to in Taiwan. Uh, it's nice in a way because the dry climate means that many of the things we suffered from in Taiwan don't apply here. Your clothes do not get moldy, your tools do not get rusty, and so having a dry climate can be advantageous. So I'm loving New Mexico, but I very much enjoy my travels back to Asia. I miss Taiwan, and I expect to visit Taiwan and China perhaps this winter.
So there is a audience response. Firdos Rana, she want to give you thank. I hope you will win Nobel Prize in the future for your contribution in technology. I think this is not me. This is actually people demand. So anyway, like we love to learn. Like this is very interesting. Uh, Techno policy and how you integrated with the sustainabilities and how you understand the culture beautifully, like different culture like Nepal, even Taiwan, and even Brazil's, and actually how you understand the cultures and the integrations with the technology, like it's all about experience, or you have different thought process. When many people actually responding, Abidul Islam, nice to see. Anyway, many audience actually very encouraging, like your thought process actually. Yes.
Well, I can never really become part of a culture, but there's a few interesting phenomena. In Japan and Korea, there's very highly structured hierarchies in society, and people are always worrying what they may say to somebody of a different status. But because I'm outside that social structure, many people feel that they can tell me anything,
Mhm.
and they speak to me very freely from their heart, and
Mhm.
I can. It's very educational for me, because people get some kind of catharsis by
Mhm.
telling me things about their life that they would not even tell their parents, or much less their boss at work. And you may or may not enjoy this story, but when during one of my visits to Iran, uh, I, at every meal they would serve Pepsi Cola, and
Mhm.
my blood sugar is kind of high, and it's not good for me to drink Pepsi Cola.
Mhm.
I said to my host that I very much respect your religion, but don't you think that Actually, beer would be healthier.
Yeah.
He said, medically, yes, but spiritually, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Sir, if you allow us, can we continue a few more minutes if you have time? Or yes.
Okay, a few more minutes if the audience
Okay.
will tolerate.
Yes, yes. Basically, a lot more audience response. That's why I think that why don't we share a few of your views? So you are a think tank. You can think from global perspective. What will be the business scenario in a global context next few years? At least in COVID situation, every country shut down, economic go collapse, many challenges. So what will be the future even globalization?
Well, I should mention in connection with the China-US situation that it's not the only game in town. In fact, Tando's first client, first project is the Taiwan government. Um, Taiwan's Ministry of Science and Technology wants to increase technology transfer and trade with small and medium enterprises in Thailand. And the Taiwan companies, especially the Taiwan ICT companies, want to have more interaction with Thai SMEs, and not only in one direction. They want to absorb technology from Thailand also, which is very innovative. Especially, I think, in the medical area in Thailand, they're quite advanced. So, but each side has very little idea about the capabilities and the needs on the other side. So, the Taiwan Ministry of Science and Technology has given a grant to Tando and to the through the National Tsinghua University in Hsinchu, Taiwan, to start investigating these things. And we'll be coaching students on principles of international technology transfer and international marketing, so that this bilateral tech trade between Taiwan and Thailand can flourish. Uh, Other than that, it's going to be so hard to see what society will be like post-COVID. I have a lot of ideas about how science will change and how science will be conducted, but um, in terms of society, we will need to think about the public's perception of science and the public's trust in science, uh, which could go up or down. I mean, it can go up because everybody understands that it was virologists and epidemiologists who got us through this epidemic alive. And yet, public perception of science could go down because people want certainty, and people are not comfortable with the fact of scientific investigation, which is that here's the state of knowledge at present, but we could be wrong, and we have to continue investigating. This is an uncomfortable kind of paradigm for people, ordinary people, to accept. And in fact, science has been wrong and has given erroneous announcements about the coronavirus. And when weeks after that, they've come up with the opposite because further research has shown the earlier thing to be wrong. Our CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, announced a few days ago that it was unlikely that non-symptomatic um, people infected with the COVID could infect somebody else. And then a few days later, they said, no, that's not true. Really, if you are infected but asymptomatic, you can infect other people. So, how will people in the ordinary rank and file have confidence in science when science is both benefiting and baffling them at the same time? And then we have to worry about people's psychological safety. Um, People's grandparents have passed away to death in isolation without their children and grandchildren at the bedside uh, because fear of infection. And this is very painful to not only to the grandparent, but to the family. And I've heard husband and wife in the home isolation saying that they're tired of looking at each other. Um, and then, as I mentioned, what's the psychological impact of having all these disasters and challenges strike us simultaneously? So we really do need to think about that. And you can think about the industries that are going to grow. Um, a friend is putting a new deck on the back of their house because they're going to spend more time at home. They have to remodel their house. They have to pay for upgraded internet access to the home because they're going to be working at home. So you can think along these lines and try to predict which industries are going to flourish uh, post-COVID.
Yes. Sir, there is another brilliant response. Actually, this is perhaps the biggest university from Muslim community. This university name is UITM. She is a professor of UITM. They have more than 140,000 students.
Wow.
She is Professor Dr. Rajiana Kashim. She sent her regards. She said a brilliant panel discussion. Congrats. So actually, many of the scholars from Muslim community, even UITM perhaps one of the biggest university from the Malaysia. So this is actually yes, sir.
Well, I really thank the audience for their kind comments. And if you want to stay in touch, you can find me on Facebook, find me on LinkedIn, or email to info@tando.org.
Yes, sir. So definitely we have a many good plan with you, and we will do different kind of policy dialogue with the collaborations of the governments and the corporations. We are young. We need a mentor like you. We love to learn. We are very open for learning from you. And this is the final question because we have many young people even today. Actually, many young people actually respond to your things. What is your advice for young folks? In terms of your point of views.
Okay, early in the hour, I mentioned one of the pieces of advice, which is to try to recognize when you are in the right place at the right time, uh, and to take advantage of it. And if someone offers you a responsibility, and your first reaction internally is, "Who, me?"
Yeah, okay.
You must not say, "Who, me?" You must
Yes,
say, "Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I will do my best."
yes, sir.
And then do your best, and your good performance with this new responsibility will advance your career further and help you learn new things. Um, I would say don't bother to make a career plan because the world is changing so rapidly, as we saw during this hour's discussion, that any plan, long-term plan you make is unlikely to be realized. Um, as the sun rose this morning, it's early morning in the United States, the sun comes through the window and I can't find an angle for the camera that reduces the sun glare, so bear with me. So I was saying don't make a long-term career plan because, as they say, man plans and God laughs. Uh, make Determine a career theme. Um, know what kinds of opportunities resonate with you. and will fit you and will make you happy. And then when those kinds of opportunities come along, you take them. Um, I guess that's,
Yes, sir.
we
Yes.
could go on another hour with that kind of discussion, but I think we're
Yes.
running out of time.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is actually brilliant discussions from your side. Hopefully, we will engage with you more. If you allow us, we will do more activities. We have a talent pool. We have energetic peoples. We have a lot of people, those who want to contribute for the brilliant things. And we have a visions. Hopefully, with your experience, with your policy, with your mentorships, we can change our at least our own community. This is our targets. So many of the audience actually today give you thanks. Even finally, Mohammad Shohel Rana, Dr. Rajiana Kasen, Abidul Islam, Feddos Rana, Ankit Khandawal, Humaira Tanzila, Musharraf Hossein Sar, Araf Mehraz. Everybody want to give you thanks, and hopefully many of the audience will observe your interviews, and definitely your mentorships can change our life and our philosophy and our working arena. Thank you for your time and effort and everything. This is very
Thank you.
very good discussion.
Please send me your team's profile and we'll work
Yes,
together
definitely.
from here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thanks,
Thank you, sir.
everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.